Harry the Father in a World Without Prophecies. Harry stood in the doorway between the hall and the kitchen, one hand resting on the wooden frame, watching his children eat breakfast. He'd been standing there for perhaps 30 seconds, maybe a full minute, long enough that the warmth from the stove had reached him, long enough that James had started his third story of the morning without noticing his father's stillness. The kitchen table was old pine, scarred from years of use, inherited from the Weasleys when he and Ginny had first set up house. James sat at the far end, gesturing broadly with his fork, a piece of bacon still speared on the tines. He was telling Lily something about a Quidditch move, his voice bright and certain in the way of 11-year-olds who believe the world will always listen. Albus sat to James's left, his plate of eggs barely touched. He'd rearranged them twice since Harry had started watching, pushed them to one side, then the other, forming small yellow hills that he pressed flat with his fork. His dark hair fell across his forehead at almost the same angle Harry's own did, though Albus's eyes were Ginny's, green but softer somehow, less startling. The grip he had on his fork was tight enough that his knuckles had gone pale. Lily sat across from her brothers, the youngest at 7, her attention moving between James's animated storytelling and Albus's silent excavation of his breakfast. She didn't speak much at meals, but Harry had learned she saw everything. The way she'd later ask questions that proved she'd been cataloguing every gesture, every pause, every unspoken thing that passed between people. The morning light came through the window above the sink at a shallow angle, not quite full summer anymore, carrying that particular golden quality of late August. It caught the dust motes drifting through the air in slow spirals, illuminated them briefly, let them fade back into invisibility. The kitchen smelled of toast and tea and the faint lingering sweetness of the marmalade Ginny preferred. Harry shifted his weight slightly, and the floorboard beneath his feet creaked. None of the children looked up. And then you roll right, see, while the bludger's still coming at you from the left, and the keeper doesn't expect it because they're tracking the bludger too. James demonstrated with his bacon, swooping it through the air in an arc that sent a small spray of grease onto the tablecloth. James, Ginny said, not looking up from the parchment she was reading, propped against the teapot. Eat the bacon, don't fly it. I'm showing Lily the hawk's head attacking formation. Your father can show her that later, with diagrams. That don't stain. James grinned and ate the bacon in one bite, still clearly pleased with his performance. He reached for another piece from the serving plate, his movements loose and easy, comfortable in his skin in a way Harry couldn't remember being at that age, or any age really, until well after the war. The war. He tried not to frame things that way, before the war, after the war, during the war. But the habit persisted, a way of marking time that he couldn't quite shake. Ginny had pointed it out once, gently, late at night, when they were both too tired to be careful with words. You divide everything into before and after, she'd said. Like nothing else counts as history. She hadn't been wrong. He pushed away from the doorframe and moved into the kitchen properly, crossing to the counter where his own tea had gone lukewarm in its mug. He picked it up, swirled the amber liquid once, considered heating it with a warming charm, then drank it cool instead. The taste was dull, slightly bitter, grounding. "Morning," Ginny said, glancing up from the parchment. Her hair was pulled back in a loose knot, a few strands escaping to frame her face. She'd been up before him, before all of them, always was. "Sleep all right?" "Fine," Harry said, which was mostly true. He'd woken twice, but fallen back asleep both times, which counted as a good night by his standards. She gave him a look that suggested she didn't quite believe him, but wasn't going to press the issue in front of the children. Instead, she held up the parchment. "School supply list. I've checked what we have from last year. James needs new robes, obviously, and both boys need potion ingredients. The usual." "I don't need new robes," James said through a mouthful of toast. "These are fine. You've grown 4 inches since June. Your ankles are showing. That's the style now." "It's not." James shrugged, already losing interest in the argument. He reached for the marmalade, knocked against Albus's water glass, caught it before it tipped. "Oops. Nice save, right?" Albus didn't respond. He was staring at his eggs with an intensity that suggested he was working out a complex arithmancy problem, though Harry knew better. He'd seen that expression before, in the mirror, in old photographs from his school days that he barely recognized himself in now. Harry set his mug down and pulled out the chair at the head of the table, lowering himself into it with a small creak of wood on wood. The table was just the right size for their family, big enough that they didn't crowd each other, small enough that everything still felt intimate, within reach. "We'll go to Diagon Alley this afternoon," Ginny said, setting the parchment aside. "Get everything in one trip. Should be quieter on a Wednesday." Harry nodded, though he doubted quieter would make much difference. Diagon Alley was never truly quiet anymore. Not for them. There was always someone who recognized them, who wanted to stop and talk, or simply stare, who saw the name Potter and all the history that came with it. "Can we get ice cream?" Lily asked. Her first words of the meal, soft but clear. "After we finish the shopping," Ginny said, "if everyone cooperates and doesn't wander off." She directed this last part at James, who had a well-established history of disappearing into joke shops and having to be retrieved. "I never wander," James said, his expression perfectly innocent. "I explore, with purpose." "You hide. Strategic repositioning." Despite himself, Harry felt his mouth twitch toward a smile. James had inherited the Weasley twins' gift for creative interpretation, along with their general disregard for rules that seemed arbitrary. It worried Harry sometimes, in the vague way most things about his children worried him, but he couldn't quite bring himself to discourage it. The world needed people who questioned arbitrary rules. He glanced at Albus, who was now using his fork to draw patterns in the egg residue on his plate. Small lines, concentric circles, something that might have been a star or might have been nothing at all. "Al," Harry said quietly, "you should eat something." Albus looked up, startled, as though he'd forgotten anyone else was at the table. "I'm not hungry." "You need breakfast before we go out. It'll be a long afternoon." "I said I'm not hungry." The words came out sharper than Harry suspected Albus intended, because his son's face immediately went red, and he dropped his gaze back to his plate. "Sorry. I'm not." Harry exchanged a glance with Ginny, who gave a small shake of her head. "Leave it. Not now." He left it. James, oblivious, or pretending to be, launched into another story, this one about something his friend from down the lane had done with a garden gnome and a paddling pool. Lily laughed, a sound like small bells, and even Albus's mouth twitched at the corners. Harry drank more of his cold tea and tried not to catalogue all the small ways Albus had been pulling inward over the past few weeks. The quiet at meals, the hours spent in his room, the way he'd stopped asking questions about Hogwarts and started only answering them in monosyllables. It was normal, probably. Nerves before starting school. Harry had been nervous too, though his circumstances had been different enough that the comparison didn't hold much water. Different. Everything had been different for him. No family breakfast table, no parents checking supply lists, no younger sister asking about ice cream. The Dursleys had driven him to King's Cross and left him there, relieved to be rid of him for 9 months, and he'd faced the Hogwarts Express alone, 11 years old, and convinced he was about to fail at this too, whatever this was. His children would not face it alone. That was the promise he'd made to himself when James was born, then again when Albus came, then once more when Lily arrived, small and squalling and perfect. They would know they were wanted. They would know they had somewhere to come back to. They would know their father loved them, even if he wasn't always sure he was doing it correctly. "Harry," Ginny's voice pulled him back. "You're staring." "Sorry." He blinked, refocused. All 3 children were looking at him now with varying expressions. James curious, Lily concerned, Albus wary. "Just thinking." "About what?" Lily asked. "About ice cream," Harry said, which was a lie, but an acceptable one. "Trying to remember if Florian Fortescue's is still serving that treacle toffee flavour you liked last time." "It's Florian Fortescue Jr. now," James said, pleased to demonstrate his knowledge. "The original Mr. Fortescue died during the war. His son took over. They have new flavours." The war. Harry's jaw tightened briefly before he forced it to relax. Even his children used it as a chronological marker now, learned from him, from Ginny, from everyone around them. Before the war, during the war, after the war. As though nothing else significant had ever happened in wizarding history. "Well," Harry said, keeping his voice level, "then we'll see what's new." Ginny stood, collecting plates with practiced efficiency. Albus's still had most of his eggs on it, but she didn't comment, just stacked it with the others, and carried them to the sink. With a casual flick of her wand, the dishes began washing themselves, water running warm over ceramic and steel. "Everyone get dressed," she said. "Proper clothes, not play robes. James, that means not the ones with the hole in the elbow. That hole is from Quidditch practice. It's a badge of honour. It's a hole. Wear the blue ones." James grumbled, but pushed back from the table, already halfway to the door, before he'd finished standing. He moved like Ginny did, all quick energy and purpose, never still, unless forced. Lily followed more slowly, sliding from her chair with careful precision, her feet finding the floor without a sound. She paused beside Harry's chair, and he reached out automatically, his hand settling on her shoulder. She leaned into the touch briefly, warm and solid and real, then continued toward the stairs. Albus remained seated, still tracing patterns on his plate, with one finger now, the fork abandoned beside it. Ginny caught. Harry's eye tilted her head toward the door. Give him a minute, or talk to him. Harry wasn't sure which she meant, but he nodded anyway. She left the kitchen, her footsteps soft on the stairs as she followed their daughter up. The water continued running in the sink. The dishes clinked gently against each other, soapy and efficient. Outside, a bird called once, twice, then fell silent. The morning light had shifted slightly, the dust motes moving in different patterns now, slower somehow, or perhaps Harry was just watching them more closely. "Al," he said finally. His son didn't look up. "I know. I need to get dressed." "That's not what I was going to say." Albus's finger stopped moving, hovering above the plate. Then what? Harry hesitated, trying to find the right words, the ones that would unlock whatever Albus was holding so tightly inside. He'd never been good with words, had always felt clumsy and obvious when trying to say important things. Ginny was better at this, or maybe just more practiced. But Ginny had left him here, alone with their middle child, and that meant something. "Are you worried about today?" Harry asked. "About Diagon Alley?" "No. Too quick, too defensive. Because if you are, that's all right. It can be a lot, all the people, and I said I'm not worried." Albus looked up now, his green eyes meeting Harry's, and there was something fierce in them, something that pushed back. "I'm fine. Everyone needs to stop asking if I'm fine. We just want to make sure. I know what you want." Albus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that made them both flinch. "You want me to be excited about Hogwarts. You want me to talk about what house I'll be in, and what classes I'll take, and whether I'll play Quidditch like everyone else in this family. But I don't. I can't." He stopped, breathing hard, his hands clenched at his sides. Harry remained seated, afraid that standing would make Albus bolt, would end this before whatever needed to come out had the chance. "You can't what?" "I can't be you," Albus said, and his voice cracked on the last word. "I can't be James. I'm just me, and that's not going to be enough, is it? Not for them. Not when they find out my name." And there it was. The thing Harry had been afraid of. The shadow he'd cast without meaning to, without wanting to, the weight of a name that his children had never asked to carry. He wanted to say the right thing. He wanted to promise that it would be fine, that no one would expect anything from Albus except what he chose to give, that being himself would always be enough. But the words stuck in his throat, because he couldn't promise those things. Not honestly. People would expect things. People would compare and measure and find Albus lacking in ways that had nothing to do with who he actually was. "Al," he started. "I need to get dressed," Albus said, and this time Harry didn't stop him. His son left the kitchen quickly, his footsteps loud on the stairs. Too loud, as though he was running from something that followed him anyway. Harry sat alone at the table, listening to the water still running in the sink, the dishes still cleaning themselves, the small ordinary sounds of magic performing its mundane tasks. The morning light continued its slow progression across the walls, indifferent and steady. He thought about his own first trip to Diagon Alley, how Hagrid had taken him, how magical it had all seemed, how impossible. He'd been so eager then, so desperate to belong somewhere, anywhere that wasn't the Dursleys' house. He'd walked through those shops like a starving person at a feast, trying to take it all in, trying to believe it was real. His children had grown up with magic. They'd never known anything else. The wonder was different for them, more familiar, less desperate. But the weight was something Harry had given them without meaning to, just by surviving, just by being who he was. He stood finally, crossed to the sink, and turned off the tap with a manual twist of his hand. The dishes settled into stillness, clean and gleaming and perfectly ordinary. Upstairs, he could hear movement, drawers opening and closing, voices calling to each other, the sounds of his family preparing to face the world together. Harry took a breath, let it out slowly, and went to join them. The leaky cauldron smelled the same as it always did. Stale beer, old wood, and something vaguely medicinal that Harry had never been able to identify. Tom, the bartender, looked up as they entered, his lined face breaking into a smile that faltered slightly when he recognized them. The smile stayed in place, but it changed, became more careful, more aware of itself. "Mr. Potter," Tom said, wiping down the bar with a cloth that had seen better days. "Mrs. Potter, good to see you all." "Hello, Tom," Ginny said, her voice pleasant but brisk. Already moving toward the back door, she had Lily's hand in hers, and James walked just ahead, his head swiveling to take in the dim interior of the pub. A few patrons sat scattered at tables, nursing drinks, and Harry felt their eyes follow his family's progress across the room. Albus walked close to Harry's side, closer than strictly necessary, his shoulder occasionally brushing Harry's arm. He kept his gaze down, fixed on the floorboards, counting steps perhaps, or simply avoiding eye contact with anyone who might be watching. They were always watching. The brick wall in the courtyard outside yielded to Ginny's one tap, the familiar pattern, 3 up, 2 across, that Harry had memorized years ago. The bricks shifted and rearranged themselves, grinding stone on stone, opening the archway into Diagon Alley proper. James pressed forward eagerly, but Ginny's hand on his shoulder held him back until the transformation completed. "Stay together," she said, not for the first time that afternoon. "No wandering." "I know, Mum," James said, but his attention was already elsewhere, drawn by the shop displays visible through the archway, the colourful chaos of the Wizarding World's main shopping district. They stepped through together, and the noise of Diagon Alley washed over them, voices calling, shop bells chiming, the occasional pop of apparition, the rustle of bags and packages being carried past. The cobblestones beneath Harry's feet were warm from the August sun, uneven in places where centuries of foot traffic had worn them smooth. The alley stretched before them, crooked and crowded, shops stacked improbably on either side with upper stories that jutted out at odd angles, defying Muggle physics in the casual way magical architecture always did. Banners hung from windows, advertising end-of-summer sales. A witch swept the front step of her shop with a broom that needed no hands to guide it. 2 wizards stood deep in conversation near Gringotts, their voices low and urgent about something Harry couldn't make out, and people noticed them. Of course they did. It started subtly. A witch walking past who did a double take, her eyes widening slightly before she looked away. A wizard emerging from flourish and blots who stopped mid-step, staring, then catching himself and hurrying on. A group of teenagers who nudged each other and pointed, not even trying to be subtle about it. Harry felt Albus press closer to his side. "Right," Ginny said, consulting the supply list she'd brought. "Flourish and blots first, then Ollivanders for Owl's wand, then Madame Malkin's for robes. We can get the potion ingredients last. They're quickest." "Can I look at the new brooms at Quality Quidditch Supplies?" James asked. "After everything else is done, if we have time." James accepted this with reasonable grace, falling into step beside his mother as they started down the alley. Lily walked between her parents, her head turning constantly to watch the shop windows, the passing witches, and Wizards, the enchanted displays that moved and sparkled and occasionally called out to passers-by. Harry kept his hand light on Albus's shoulder, a gentle pressure that he hoped was reassuring rather than restraining. His son's tension was palpable, transmitted through the fabric of his robes, the set of his shoulders. They passed Ollivander's. They'd return to that shortly, and Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlour, where a small queue had formed despite the heat. A girl about James's age was licking a bright purple cone, her tongue stained lavender. She saw them, and froze mid-lick, her eyes going round. "Mum," she hissed to the witch beside her. "Mum, that's—" "Shh," the witch said, but she looked too, and her expression shifted into something complicated. Recognition, curiosity, perhaps a touch of pity, though Harry couldn't imagine why. They'd won. The war was over. What was there to pity? Flourish and blots appeared on their left, its windows stacked with books, some floating in lazy circles, others opening and closing their covers invitingly. The shop bell chimed as they entered, a clear silvery note that seemed to ripple through the crowded interior. The smell hit Harry immediately. Old paper, leather bindings, ink, and something else, something indefinable that was simply the scent of knowledge accumulated. Floor-to-ceiling shelves stretched back into the shop's depths, narrow aisles between them barely wide enough for two people to pass. Students crowded the space, parents helping them locate required texts, the low murmur of voices creating a constant backdrop of sound. Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1, Ginny read from the list. The Dark Forces, a guide to self-protection, a beginner's guide to transfiguration. James, you already have that one. 1,000 magical herbs and fungi. She moved deeper into the shop, Lily still attached to her hand, James following dutifully. Harry started to follow, then realized Albus hadn't moved from just inside the doorway. His son stood very still, staring at a display table near the front of the shop. It took Harry a moment to understand what he was looking at. A stack of books, all identical, all bearing the same cover image of Harry himself, younger, caught mid-spell, his face set in grim determination. The title read, Harry Potter, The Boy Who Lived to Win. Harry felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd known about the book. It was the third or fourth biography published without his cooperation or approval, but he'd managed to avoid seeing it in person until now. The author was someone he'd never met, a journalist who'd interviewed everyone except Harry himself, building a narrative from second-hand accounts and speculation. "Come on," Harry said quietly, touching Albus's arm. "Let's find your books." But Albus was already reaching for one of the copies, picking it up with both hands as though it might bite him. He opened it to a random page, his eyes scanning the text. Harry could see the page from where he stood. Something about the Battle of Hogwarts, about Harry's fearless leadership and noble sacrifice. Words that made the whole thing sound like a story, like fiction, like something that had happened to someone else. "Did you really do all this?" Albus asked, his voice barely audible over the shop's ambient noise. Harry wanted to say no. He wanted to explain that the book was sensationalized, that it flattened everything into heroics, when the reality had been mostly fear and confusion and desperation. He wanted to tell Albus that he'd been terrified, that he'd wanted to run, that he'd only kept going because there wasn't any other choice. But someone was approaching them, an older wizard with neat robes and a shop clerk badge pinned to his chest. His face lit up when he saw Harry, a smile spreading across his features that was too wide, too eager. "Mr. Potter," the clerk said, extending his hand. "What an honor. I was hoping you might come in while I was working. I'm a great admirer, truly. Your story is, well, it's everything, isn't it? An inspiration to us all." Harry shook the offered hand briefly, trying to extract himself as quickly as politeness allowed. "Thank you. We're just here for school books." Of course. The clerk's eyes drifted to Albus, still holding the biography. "Starting Hogwarts this year, is he? Must be exciting. Following in his father's footsteps. Big shoes to fill, eh?" Albus's grip on the book tightened, his knuckles going white against the cover. "He's his own person," Harry said, more sharply than he'd intended, "not following anyone's footsteps." The clerk blinked, his smile faltering. "Yes, of course. I only meant it must be quite something, being Harry Potter's son, the legacy and all that." "We need to find some textbooks," Harry said, taking the biography from Albus's hands and setting it back on the display table with more force than necessary. "If you could, point us toward the first-year requirements." "Back left corner," the clerk said, his enthusiasm dimmed, but not extinguished. "Let me know if you need anything at all. Would you mind signing a copy? For the shop. We could display it. Tell customers that Harry Potter himself was here." "No," Harry said. Then, softer, "Sorry, we're in a bit of a hurry." He guided Albus away, one hand on his son's shoulder, steering him through the crowded aisles toward where Ginny and the others had disappeared. Behind them, he could hear the clerk saying something to another customer. The word Potter carrying clearly through the shop's acoustics. They found Ginny comparing two different editions of a potions text. Lily sitting cross-legged on the floor nearby with a picture book open in her lap. James browsing a shelf of Quidditch strategy guides despite his mother's presence. "Got the first-year texts," Ginny said, not looking up. "Did you find—" Harry, what's wrong? He must have looked more shaken than he'd realized. Nothing. Just people. She glanced past him toward where the clerk was still visible, then back at Harry, understanding crossing her face. "Right. Let's pay and move on." The transaction was quick, Ginny handling it while Harry stood with the children near the door, his body positioned between them and the rest of the shop. Professional paranoia, Kingsley had called it once, the habit of always knowing where the exits were, of keeping his back to walls, of scanning crowds for threats that were no longer there. Except the threats now were different, softer, just people wanting to talk, to touch the legend, to connect themselves to the story. But they crowded nonetheless, pressed in with their expectations and their assumptions, and Harry could feel Albus shrinking beside him with each passing moment. Outside, the afternoon light seemed too bright after the shop's interior. Harry blinked against it, letting his eyes adjust. "Ice cream. Now?" Lily asked hopefully. "Not yet, love," Ginny said. "Al still needs his wand, remember?" They walked toward Ollivander's in a tight group, Harry and Ginny on the outside like shields, the children between them. More people noticed them. Of course they did. And more people stared. A wizard in lime green robes actually stopped walking to watch them pass, his mouth slightly open. Two witches near Gringotts leaned close together, whispering, their eyes tracking the Potter family's progress down the alley. James seemed oblivious to it all. Or, perhaps, he simply didn't care. He walked with the same easy confidence he'd had at breakfast, chattering to Lily about something, his hands gesturing animatedly. But Albus walked like someone crossing a stage, aware of every eye on him, every whisper. His face had gone carefully blank, a mask that reminded Harry uncomfortably of how he himself had learned to school his features during those early years after the war, when every public appearance had felt like a performance. Ollivander's was quieter, darker, smaller than Flourish and Blots. The shop stretched back into seemingly impossible depths, shelves stacked with narrow boxes rising toward a ceiling lost in shadow. The air smelled of wood and dust and old magic, layered and patient. An elderly wizard emerged from between the shelves, not Ollivander himself, who had died several years after the war, but his successor, a woman named Arya, who had worked as his apprentice for decades. She had pale hair and sharp eyes, and she looked at the Potter family without the excessive enthusiasm of the clerk in the bookshop. "Albus Potter," she said, "not a question. I have been expecting you. Your brother's wand did quite well, I trust." "Yes, ma'am," James said, before anyone could stop him. 11 inches, pliable, phoenix feather core. "I was addressing your brother," Arya said mildly, and James subsided, looking only slightly chastened. Albus nodded, not quite meeting her gaze. "Come," Arya said, gesturing toward a clear space near the front counter. "Let's see what chooses you." The measuring process was the same as Harry remembered from his own first visit. The enchanted tape measuring everything from arm length to the distance between nostrils, flitting around Albus like a persistent insect. His son stood very still through it all, his face maintaining that careful blankness. Arya returned with the first box, opening it to reveal a wand of pale wood. "Try this. Elm, 10 inches, dragon heartstring." Albus took it, held it uncertainly. "Give it a wave," Arya instructed. He did. Nothing happened. "No matter," Arya said, already reaching for another box. "That's quite normal. Most people try several before finding their match." She brought box after box, wands of different woods, ash, cherry, willow, cedar, different cores, phoenix feather, unicorn hair, dragon heartstring, different lengths and flexibilities. Each time, Albus took the wand, waved it, and nothing happened, or something wrong happened. A shower of sparks, a loud bang, once a smell like burning rubber that made Lily wrinkle her nose. Harry found himself standing near the shop's front window, looking out at Diagon Alley while Arya worked. Ginny stood beside him, her hand finding his, their fingers interlacing in a familiar grip. "He's terrified," she murmured, too low for the children to hear. "I know. Not of the wand, of everything it means." Harry nodded. He watched 2 wizards pass by outside, deep in conversation. Normal people living normal lives, not weighed down by names that meant too much. "Mr. Potter," Arya called, and something in her tone made Harry turn. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Curiosity, perhaps, or realization. "Your wand? May I see it?" Harry hesitated, then drew his wand from his pocket. Holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, supple, the same wand that had chosen him at 11, that had connected with Voldemort's, that had survived everything, and remained loyal. He handed it to Arya. She held it carefully, examining it with professional interest. Then she disappeared into the shop's depths, returning a moment later with a box that looked older than the others, its edges worn smooth by time. "Try this," she said to Albus, and her voice was gentler now. Albus took the wand from the box. It was similar to Harry's in colour, though the wood grain was different, the handle shaped slightly differently. He held it, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then warmth spread through the shop. Not heat exactly, but a feeling like sunlight, like comfort, like something settling into place. The wand tip glowed softly gold, and Albus's eyes widened, his mask slipping for the first time since they'd entered Diagon Alley. "Holly," Arya said quietly. 11.5 inches, slightly springy, phoenix feather core, from the same phoenix as your father's wand, as it happens. Fawkes gave only 3 feathers in his long life. Your father has one, Tom Riddle had one, and now you have the 3rd. The warmth in the shop dissipated, but something of it remained in Albus's face, a cautious wonder that made him look younger than his 11 years. "How much?" Harry asked, reaching for his money pouch. 7 galleons, same as any wand. He counted out the coins, and Arya wrapped the wand carefully, placing it in a box with the Ollivander's logo stamped in silver on the lid. She handed it to Albus, who took it with both hands, holding it as though it might vanish if he wasn't careful. They left the shop together, stepping back into the bright afternoon. The crowd seemed thicker now, or perhaps Harry was just more aware of it, the way people moved around them, giving them space, but watching, always watching. A young witch whispered something to her companion. An older wizard nodded in their direction, his expression approving, as though the Potter family existed for his assessment. "Madame Malkin's next," Ginny said, checking her list. "Then potion supplies, then—" "Ice cream," Lily said firmly. "Yes," Ginny agreed, smiling. "Then ice cream." They walked, and people watched, and the cobblestones were warm beneath their feet, and somewhere overhead a shop sign creaked in a breeze that Harry couldn't feel. Albus held his wand box close to his chest, and James was already asking questions about phoenix feathers, and Lily was counting shop windows under her breath. And Harry walked beside them, his family, wondering how to shield them from something as pervasive as attention, as persistent as expectations, as inescapable as a name they'd been born into and couldn't change. The afternoon light slanted through the crooked buildings, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Diagon Alley continued its business around them, indifferent to the weight of legacy, to the burden of being watched, to the small quiet ways that history pressed down on children who only wanted to buy school supplies and eat ice cream. They walked on together, and the whispers followed them like shadows. King's Cross Station smelled of diesel and dust and the particular metallic tang that all train stations seemed to carry. The Muggle side of the station bustled with travellers, business people with briefcases, families with luggage, a group of tourists clustered around a map, arguing in a language Harry didn't recognize. The sounds echoed off the high ceiling, creating a constant wash of noise that made it difficult to distinguish individual conversations. Harry pushed the trolley with James's trunk strapped to it, the cage containing James's owl, a brown tawny named Archie, perched precariously on top. Ginny walked beside him with Lily's hand in hers, and the boys walked just ahead, James's energy barely contained, Albus's steps growing slower with each passing moment. They approached the barrier between platforms 9 and 10, that solid brick wall that had terrified Harry the first time he'd seen it, certain he'd crash straight through or bounce back or simply look like a fool in front of all these muggles who couldn't see what he was meant to see. "Right," Ginny said, stopping a short distance from the barrier. James first, then Al. We'll follow." James needed no encouragement. He took his trolley. Ginny had insisted they each push their own, teaching responsibility, she'd said, and walked straight at the barrier without hesitation, without even slowing down. The muggles passing by didn't notice as he simply disappeared, passing through solid brick as though it were mist. Albus stood frozen, staring at the barrier. "It's the same as always," Ginny said gently. "You've done this before." That was different. Albus's voice was quiet, tight. "That was just visiting. This is—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Harry crouched down, bringing himself to Albus's eye level. His son's face was pale, green eyes too bright, jaw clenched with the effort of holding something in. Fear, probably, or panic, or the overwhelming certainty that he was about to fail at something before he'd even begun. Harry saw himself in that face. Not the surface resemblance. Albus looked more like Ginny, really, except for the perpetually messy hair. But in the expression, the bone-deep anxiety of someone convinced they're about to be found wanting. "Al," Harry said, and found himself uncertain what to say next. What wisdom did he have to offer? What reassurance could he give that wouldn't be a lie? The first time Harry had gone through this barrier, he'd been running away from the Dursleys, desperate for anything that wasn't Privet Drive. He'd wanted Hogwarts with a hunger that had nothing to do with learning magic and everything to do with escape, with belonging, with finally being somewhere he fit. His children weren't running from anything. They were running toward something, toward expectations, toward legacy, toward the future that had been written about in books before they were old enough to read. "You don't have to be anything except yourself," Harry said finally, knowing even as he spoke that the words were inadequate, too simple for the complexity of what Albus was feeling. "I know people will have expectations, and I know that's not fair, but—" "What if I'm sorted into Slytherin?" Albus blurted out, the question that had clearly been consuming him for weeks, finally escaping. "What if the hat puts me there, and everyone thinks? What if you think?" Harry felt something crack open in his chest, some old wound he'd thought had healed. How many times had he told himself he'd moved past his prejudices, that he'd learned better, that he understood Slytherin House wasn't synonymous with evil? And yet, here was his son, terrified of disappointing him, terrified that sorting into a particular house would make him less loved. "Then you'll be in Slytherin," Harry said, forcing the words out clearly, firmly, needing Albus to hear the certainty in them, even if Harry himself still struggled with old instincts. "And you'll still be my son, and I'll still be proud of you. But you were Gryffindor, and Mum, and James, and everyone." "The hat wanted to put me in Slytherin," Harry said, and watched Albus's eyes widen. "Did I ever tell you that? First thing it said when it touched my head. You could be great, you know. It's all here in your head, and Slytherin will help you on the way to greatness." Albus shook his head slowly, clearly stunned by this revelation. "I asked it not to," Harry continued. "I'd met Draco Malfoy in Diagon Alley, and he'd been awful. And he'd told me all Slytherins were great, and you know who had been one, and I was 11 and terrified, and I asked not to be Slytherin, and the hat listened. So you chose. The hat takes your choice into account. It considers where you'd fit, but also where you want to be." Harry hesitated, then added, "Albus, Severus Potter, you were named for 2 headmasters of Hogwarts, One of them was a Slytherin, and he was the bravest man I ever knew. If the hat sorts you into Slytherin, you'll be in good company. Something in Albus's face shifted. Not relaxation exactly, but a loosening, a small release of the tension that had been coiling tighter for weeks. Really? Really? Harry stood, offering his hand. Come on. James is probably already on the train, saving seats and telling everyone embarrassing stories about us. Albus took his father's hand, a gesture he was usually too old for now. But today he held on tightly as they approached the barrier. Together they walked through. That odd sensation of pressure and release, the momentary darkness, and then platform 9 3/4 spread before them, and it was exactly as Harry remembered and completely different all at once. The Hogwarts Express stood gleaming scarlet in the autumn sunlight, steam rising from its engine in great white plumes that drifted toward the enchanted ceiling far above. The platform teemed with students and parents, trunks being loaded by porters, owls hooting from their cages, cats winding between legs, a toad that someone's mother was chasing with increasing desperation. The noise was enormous. Voices calling goodbyes, younger siblings crying, friends shrieking with joy at reuniting, the train's whistle releasing sharp blasts of sound. The smells of steam and coal smoke and magic mingled together, sharp and nostalgic. And people noticed them immediately. It started with a witch near the barrier who did a double take, her mouth forming a silent "oh" of recognition. Then a group of older students who stopped mid-conversation to stare. A father lifting his daughter's trunk who paused, the trunk hanging forgotten in mid-air, held by magic, while he gaped at Harry Potter standing on the platform like any other parent seeing his children off to school. Harry felt Albus's hand tighten in his. "There you are," Ginny said, emerging through the barrier behind them with Lily. "James has already found the twins. Ron and Hermione are over there." She nodded toward the far end of the platform, where Harry could see his best friends, Ron towering over most of the crowd, Hermione looking harried as she tried to organize her own children's luggage. They made their way through the crowd, Harry keeping Albus close, Ginny navigating with the practiced ease of someone who'd played professional Quidditch and knew how to move through crowds without getting trapped. People made way for them, whether out of politeness or nervousness, Harry couldn't tell, and the whispers followed in their wake. "That's Harry Potter. His sons, both of them. Wonder which house." Ron saw them first, his face breaking into a grin. "Finally. Hermione's been fretting about whether you'd be late." "I have not been fretting," Hermione said, but she hugged Ginny tightly. Then Harry, before, crouching down to Lily's level. "Hello, sweetheart. Are you sad to see your brothers go?" Lily nodded solemnly. Rose, Ron, and Hermione's daughter stood near her parents with her trunk already loaded, looking eager to board. Hugo, their younger son, was chasing his brother's owl around in circles, earning exasperated looks from Hermione. James and Albus had found their cousin, and James was already talking animatedly about something, his hands gesturing wildly. Harry watched Albus, saw how his son stood slightly apart even while being part of the group, his new wand box still clutched in one hand. Rose said something to him, and he responded, but his answers were brief, his body language closed. "He's terrified," Ron said quietly, moving to stand beside Harry. "Al, I mean. You can see it." "I know. Rose is too, though she hides it better, Keeps asking Hermione about the OWLs even though they're years away. Ron shook his head. Didn't think I'd be this nervous sending them off. Thought it'd be exciting, you know. Instead, I keep thinking about all the things that could go wrong. Nothing's going to go wrong, Hermione said, joining them. It's Hogwarts. It's safe now. McGonagall won't let anything happen to them. Harry wanted to believe that. McGonagall was an excellent headmistress. The school had been rebuilt and reinforced. The wards were stronger than ever. But safe was a relative term, and Harry had learned too well that danger could come from unexpected places, that threats didn't always announce themselves with dark marks and Death Eaters. The train's whistle blew, a warning that departure was approaching. "Right," Ginny said briskly. "On the train, both of you. James, help your brother with his trunk." James was already moving, practical despite his energy, helping to levitate Albus's trunk into the train's luggage compartment. Rose followed with her own trunk, and Hugo stopped chasing the owl long enough to hug his mother goodbye. Albus stood on the platform, looking between the train and his parents, his face caught between wanting to leave and wanting to stay, wanting to be brave and wanting to hide. Harry crouched down again, aware of all the eyes on them, of phones, both Muggle and magical, probably capturing this moment, of the way this goodbye would be discussed and analysed and turned into another story about Harry Potter's family. He didn't care. Let them watch. His son needed him. "Listen to me," Harry said, pitching his voice low so only Albus could hear. "You're going to be fine. Better than fine. You're going to find friends, and you're going to learn magic, and some of it will be hard, and some of it will be brilliant, and all of it will be yours. Not mine, yours." "What if I'm not good at it?" Albus whispered. "What if I'm rubbish at magic, and everyone expects—" "Then you'll learn. Just like everyone else learns, just like I learned." Harry gripped Albus's shoulders gently. "I wasn't some prodigy, Al. I was. Average at most things, terrible at potions, only good at defense because I had to be. You don't have to be exceptional. You just have to be yourself. But being myself might not be enough. It's enough for me." Harry pulled his son into a hug, felt Albus cling to him tightly, small and solid and terrified. It's always been enough. It will always be enough. When they separated, Albus's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but he nodded. Ginny hugged him next, murmuring something Harry couldn't hear. Then Lily demanded her own goodbye, throwing her arms around her brother's waist with surprising force. "Bring me something from Honeydukes," Lily said. "Chocolate frogs, the ones with the good cards." "That's all of them," Albus said, almost smiling. "Then bring lots." James appeared in the train's doorway, leaning out. "Al, come on. I found a compartment near the middle. Rose is saving it." Albus picked up his wand box. He'd insisted on carrying it himself, not packing it with his trunk, and climbed aboard. He turned in the doorway, looking back at his family one more time. Harry raised his hand in farewell. Ginny did the same. Lily waved enthusiastically with both hands. And then Albus was gone, disappearing into the train's interior, and James was right behind him. And doors were slamming all along the platform as parents called final goodbyes and students hung out windows waving. The whistle blew again. Longer this time. Urgent. The train began to move, slowly at first. Wheels screeching against rails, steam billowing up in great clouds. Students pressed against windows, hands waving, some crying, some laughing. Harry searched for Albus's face among them, but couldn't find it. Perhaps he'd already moved away from the window, settling into his seat, trying to make himself small and unnoticeable. "He'll be all right," Ron said, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as Harry. "They both will. It's Hogwarts. Best years of our lives. Weren't they?" Harry thought about that. About first year and the Philosopher's Stone, second year and the Basilisk, third year and Sirius, fourth year and the tournament, fifth year and Umbridge, sixth year and Dumbledore's death, seventh year on the run. Best years felt like a stretch. But there had been good moments too. Friendship and discovery and learning who he was outside of what other people expected him to be. There had been Christmases in the common room and Quidditch matches and the simply magic of learning to transform a match into a needle, learning that he could do magic, that he belonged somewhere. "Yeah," Harry said finally, "they were." The train had disappeared now, around the curve in the tracks, gone from sight, though the sound of it still echoed faintly. Parents were beginning to disperse, some wiping their eyes, others chatting about when they'd done this themselves. How quickly the years passed. How strange it felt to be on this side of the goodbye. Harry stood with Ginny and Lily, Ron and Hermione and Hugo, and they didn't move immediately, didn't rush to leave. They stayed on the platform as it slowly emptied, as the steam dissipated, as the echoes faded to silence. Lily tugged on Harry's hand. "Are you sad?" Harry considered this. He was sad, in a way. Sad that his son was growing up, moving away, facing challenges Harry couldn't shield him from. But there was something else too, something more complicated. Pride, perhaps. Or hope. Or simply the strange bitter sweetness of watching your children step into their own lives. "A little," Harry admitted, "but also happy. Albus is going to have his own adventures now. Without you. Without me," Harry agreed. "That's how it should be." Lily seemed to accept this, though she pressed closer to his side, as though already anticipating her own future goodbye from this same platform. They walked back through the barrier together, emerging into the Muggle station with its different smells and sounds, its mundane normalcy. No one stared at them here. No one whispered or pointed or tried to take their picture. They were just another family in a crowded station, just parents who'd seen their children off to boarding school, ordinary and unremarkable. Harry breathed easier on this side of the barrier, and he wasn't proud of that fact, but it was true nonetheless. "Come on," Ginny said, her hand finding his. "Let's go home." Home was quieter without the boys. The house felt larger, emptier, as though two children had somehow taken up more space than their small bodies should have occupied. Harry found himself listening for James's loud voice, for Albus's quiet movements, and hearing only silence. He stood in their bedroom doorway that evening after Lily had gone to bed, looking at the two beds. James's a chaotic mess, even though he wasn't in it. Albus's made with military precision. Their things scattered around the room, waiting for their return at Christmas. Books and toys and bits of parchment, the accumulated debris of childhood. "They'll write tomorrow," Ginny said from behind him. "Or the next day, once they've settled. You know how it is at first, too much happening to remember to send letters." "I know." "He's going to be fine, Harry. Albus is stronger than he thinks." Harry nodded, still looking at the empty beds. He remembered his own first night at Hogwarts, the wonder of the Great Hall, the terror of the sorting hat, the relief of hearing Gryffindor shouted out to the assembled school. He remembered lying in the dormitory afterward, in darkness, listening to his new roommates breathe, thinking that for the first time in his life, he was somewhere he belonged. He hoped Albus would feel that. He hoped both his sons would find at Hogwarts what Harry had found: friendship, purpose, a place to become themselves. But he also knew that being Harry Potter's son meant Albus's experience would be different from his own in fundamental ways. The boy who lived had gone to Hogwarts unknown, just another first year, remarkable only for his scar. Albus Severus Potter had gone to Hogwarts carrying the weight of his name, burdened by expectations before the Sorting Hat ever touched his head. Harry turned away from the empty room, letting Ginny pull him toward their own bed, toward sleep, toward tomorrow, when life would continue without his sons in the house. Outside, the night was quiet, stars invisible behind London's light pollution, the ordinary world turning in its ordinary way, indifferent to goodbyes, to fears, to children growing up whether their parents were ready or not. Harry closed his eyes and tried not to worry. He failed, of course, but he tried. The owl arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after the Hogwarts Express had departed King's Cross. Harry was making breakfast, eggs and toast, simple things he could manage without magic because it felt better to keep his hands busy, when he heard the familiar sound of wings beating against the kitchen window. It was a school owl, one of the large tawny ones Hogwarts kept for students who didn't have their own. It perched on the windowsill, looking imperious and slightly annoyed, as though delivering post to the Potter household was beneath its dignity. Harry opened the window and the owl swooped in, dropping 2 letters on the kitchen table before helping itself to water from the bowl they kept out for such occasions. 2 letters. 1 from each son. Lily appeared in the doorway, still in her nightgown, her hair a wild tangle around her face. Is it from them? Yes. Harry wiped his hands on a tea towel and reached for the letters, checking the names written on the outside in his son's distinct handwriting. James's was sprawling and careless, the letters large and uneven. Albus's was smaller, more precise, each character carefully formed. What do they say? Lily climbed into her chair at the table, leaning forward eagerly. I haven't read them yet. Read them now? Harry smiled despite the nervousness that had settled in his chest the moment he'd seen the owl. He picked up James's letter first. The envelope was already slightly crumpled, as though it had been shoved into a pocket before being entrusted to the owl. He opened it carefully, unfolding the parchment inside. Dear Mum and Dad and Lily, Hogwarts is brilliant. I'm in Gryffindor, obviously. And the common room is exactly how you described it, Dad. The fat lady asked me if I was your son, and when I said yes, she got all teary and said something about that dear brave boy, and let me in without making me give the password. A bit embarrassing, but also pretty useful. Rose is in Gryffindor too, so we're in the same house, which is good, because she's already helping me with Transfiguration homework. Professor McGonagall is scary, but fair. She gave us homework on the first day, which Rose says is normal, but seems excessive to me. I made the house Quidditch team. First year, and I'm a chaser. Tryouts were yesterday, and the captain said I've got natural talent and good instincts, which I'm pretty sure means I'm brilliant. First match is in 3 weeks against Ravenclaw. The food here is amazing. I've been eating way too much, but the stairs make you work it off. Seriously, why are there so many stairs? And why do they move? I was late to Charms yesterday because the staircase decided to go somewhere else while I was on it. Tell Lily I'll bring her back chocolate frogs at Christmas. The common room has loads of good cards. I've already got Dumbledore and Morgana. Al's being weird and quiet. I know he's my brother, so I have to say this, but you should probably write to him or something. He barely talks at meals, and I think some of the other first years are starting to think he's stuck up, when really he's just, you know, Al. Love you all, James P.S. Can you send me some of those biscuits Mum makes? The ones with chocolate chips. The house elves here are great, but nobody makes biscuits like Mum. Harry read the letter twice, then passed it to Lily, who grabbed it eagerly and began reading aloud in a voice that tried to imitate James's enthusiasm. Ginny appeared in the doorway, already dressed, her hair pulled back in a practical braid. "James?" she asked. "Made the Quidditch team," Harry said. "First year. He's pleased with himself." "Of course he did." Ginny poured herself tea, looking unsurprised. "The boy's been flying since he could walk. What about Al?" Harry picked up the second letter with more trepidation. The envelope was pristine, sealed carefully, the handwriting on the outside almost too neat, as though Albus had practiced writing his parents' names several times before committing to the final version. He opened it slowly. "Dear Mum and Dad, I arrived safely at Hogwarts. The journey on the train was fine. Rose saved us seats in a compartment, and we played Exploding Snap for most of the trip. James ate too many chocolate frogs. Felt sick, but he won't admit it. The sorting ceremony was long. Professor McGonagall explained the houses, and then we went up one by one. The hat takes different amounts of time for different people. It took 5 minutes for me. James says that's a long time, but Rose says it's normal for people who could fit in multiple houses. I'm in Gryffindor. I know you said it wouldn't matter which house I was in, but I think maybe you're relieved anyway. I am too, sort of. Though the hat said I had qualities for other houses as well. It mentioned Slytherin specifically, which made me remember what you told me at King's Cross, Dad, about how it wanted to put you there too. That helped. The classes are harder than I expected. I'm doing all right in most subjects, but potions is difficult. Professor Slughorn talks very fast and assumes we know things we haven't learned yet. Or maybe I'm just slow at catching on. Rose is brilliant at everything already, and James seems to understand things without even trying, which is annoying. The castle is beautiful, but also overwhelming. There are too many people and too many staircases, and everyone seems to know who I am before I introduce myself. A 6th year asked me yesterday if I could perform a Patronus charm yet, and when I said I didn't know how, he looked disappointed. I don't think he was being mean, exactly. Just expecting something. I'm sharing a dormitory with 4 other boys. They're all nice. One of them, Michael, asked if the scar on your forehead still hurts, Dad. I said I didn't know because I'd never asked. Does it? James told you to write to me, didn't he? I'm fine. Really, just adjusting. Tell Lily I miss her. Love, Albus P.S. Thank you for what you said at the station, about being enough. I'm trying to remember that. Harry read the letter 3 times, his tea growing cold in its mug beside him. Ginny came to stand behind his chair, reading over his shoulder, one hand coming to rest on his shoulder with gentle pressure. He's struggling, she said quietly. I know. But he's trying? I know that too. Lily had finished reading James's letter, and was looking at them with the too perceptive gaze of a 7-year-old who understood more than adults gave her credit for. Is Albus sad? Harry considered lying, softening it, but decided against it. I think he's having a harder time than James, but that's okay. People adjust at different speeds. You should write back, Lily said firmly. Tell him it gets better. Does it get better? Ginny asked, still standing behind Harry, her question directed at him, but also at herself, at the memory of her own first year at Hogwarts, her own struggles with being a Weasley in a school full of Weasleys, with being possessed by Voldemort, with finding her own identity in the shadow of her brothers. Yes, Harry said, because it was true enough. Eventually. Once you figure out who you are instead of who people expect you to be. He stood, carrying his cold tea to the sink, and stared out the window at their small garden. The owl had departed while they were reading, off to deliver other letters to other families, indifferent to the contents of the messages it carried. Harry spent most of that afternoon composing his reply. He went through 3 pieces of parchment, each attempt feeling wrong in different ways. Too jovial, and he'd sound dismissive of Albus's struggles. Too serious, and he'd confirm that there was something to worry about. Too much advice, and he'd sound like he thought Albus couldn't figure things out himself. He settled finally on something simple. Dear Al, thank you for your letter. I'm glad you're in Gryffindor, not because I would have loved you less in another house, but because I think you're glad. That matters more. To answer your question, no, my scar doesn't hurt anymore. It hasn't since the war ended. But it's a fair question, and you can always ask me anything. Tell Michael he's welcome to write if he has more questions, though I can't promise I'll have good answers. Potions was my worst subject. I was terrible at it for years, partly because I wasn't paying attention, and partly because Professor Snape seemed to have decided I was rubbish before I'd even started. Slughorn is a different teacher entirely. He actually wants his students to succeed. Ask him questions if you're confused. He'll appreciate the interest. About people expecting things from you. I wish I could tell you that stops. It doesn't. Not entirely, but it does get easier to ignore, or at least to not let it define how you see yourself. You're not responsible for living up to other people's expectations. You're only responsible for being the person you want to be. I'm proud of you, Al. Not because you're in Gryffindor, or because you're my son, or because of anything you've accomplished. I'm proud of you because you're trying, even when it's hard, even when you're scared. That's real courage. The castle can be overwhelming first, but eventually it starts to feel like home. Give it time. And if you need to talk about anything at all, send an owl. I'll write back the same day. Love, Dad, P.S. Lily. Says to tell you she misses you and expects chocolate frogs at Christmas. Many chocolate frogs. James has apparently already promised her some, so you're both committed now. He wrote a shorter letter to James, congratulating him on making the Quidditch team, and promising to send biscuits with the next owl, along with some advice about keeping up with schoolwork even when Quidditch practice got intense. It felt easier to write to James somehow. His eldest son's happiness was uncomplicated, his enthusiasm genuine and untroubled by the weight of expectation. But it was Albus's letter that Harry kept returning to, reading again in the quiet moments, trying to pass what his son wasn't saying as much as what he had written. The pauses between sentences, the careful word choices, the politeness that felt like a wall against vulnerability. Ginny found him that evening sitting in the boys' bedroom, Albus's letter in his hand, staring at the empty beds. "You're going to worry yourself sick," she said, not unkindly. "He sounds so alone. He's at Hogwarts, surrounded by hundreds of students. He's not alone. You can be surrounded by people and still feel alone." Harry folded the letter carefully, creasing it along the lines it had already been folded. "I did it for years." Ginny sat beside him on Albus's bed, the mattress dipping slightly under her weight. "You're not 11 anymore, Harry, and Al isn't you. He's got friends there. Rose, James, his dormitory mates. He's got professors who aren't going to hate him on sight. He's got us here, writing to him, supporting him. It's not the same." I know. Harry did know, intellectually. But the fear persisted anyway, irrational and insistent. The fear that his son was suffering in ways Harry couldn't see or help with. That being Harry, Potter's son, would mark Albus for a loneliness Harry understood too well. "He'll find his way," Ginny said softly. "Just like you did. Just like James is doing. They're both stronger than you think." Over the following weeks, letters arrived with a regular frequency. James wrote often, but briefly. Quick updates about Quidditch practice, complaints about homework, requests for various items he'd forgotten to pack or suddenly decided he needed. His letters were cheerful, uncomplicated, full of misspellings and crossed-out words and occasional grease stains from eating while writing. Albus's letters came less frequently and said less, carefully composed reports that read almost like assignments. He was doing well in defense against the dark arts. Charms was interesting, but challenging. He'd joined the Gobstones Club, which met on Thursday afternoons. He'd made a friend named Marcus, who was good at herbology and helped him study. Harry wrote back to every letter, trying to match his tone to each son's needs. With James, he was encouraging but firm about keeping up with schoolwork. With Albus, he was careful and steady, trying to reassure without smothering, to show interest without prying. He never asked directly, "Are you happy? Are you making friends? Do the other students treat you well?" Those questions felt too heavy, too loaded with his own anxiety. Instead, he asked about classes, about the castle, about small concrete things that Albus could answer without having to examine his own emotional state too closely. October arrived with falling leaves and cooler mornings. Lily started asking when her brothers would be home for Christmas, counting the weeks on her fingers and being disappointed each time by how many remained. Harry and Ginny settled into a new rhythm, with 2 children gone, the house quieter, meals smaller, evenings less chaotic. Harry found himself standing at the kitchen window most mornings, watching for the school owl, and trying not to let Ginny see how much he worried in the spaces between letters. One Thursday evening, an owl arrived after dinner, unusual timing that made Harry's heart jump. He recognized James's handwriting on the envelope, but the letter inside was shorter than usual, just a few hurried lines. "Dad, Al's being really weird. Won't talk to anyone at meals, spends all his time in the library or the dormitory. Some Slytherin 5th years were teasing him yesterday about living up to the family name, and he just walked away without saying anything. I tried to talk to him about it, but he told me to leave him alone. I don't know what to do. Can you write to him? Or maybe visit? Is that allowed?" James Harry read the letter twice, then showed it to Ginny, who frowned as she scanned the words. "That's not good," she said. "No. You should write to McGonagall. Ask her to keep an eye on him." Harry nodded, already reaching for parchment and quill. But even as he began composing the letter to the headmistress, he knew that adult supervision wasn't what Albus needed. His son was drowning in expectations, suffocating under the weight of a name he'd never asked for, and no amount of well-meaning professors watching over him would fix that. What Albus needed was what Harry hadn't known how to give him on Platform 9 3/4. Concrete proof that being himself, exactly as he was, would be enough. That he didn't have to perform heroism or live up to legends or apologize for being ordinary. Harry finished the letter to McGonagall, then started another one, this time to Albus. The words came slowly, each one chosen carefully, trying to reach across the distance between them, trying to say what Harry had needed someone to say to him when he was 11 and terrified and convinced he was failing at being the person everyone expected. "Dear Al," James wrote to me, "he's worried about you, which means I'm worried about you too. You don't have to tell me what's wrong if you don't want to, but I want you to know that I'm here, and I'm listening, and nothing you tell me will disappoint me." When I was in my 5th year at Hogwarts, I spent most of that year angry at everyone, pushing away the people who cared about me, convinced that I had to handle everything alone. It was one of the worst years of my life, not because of what was happening outside, but because I wouldn't let anyone in. I don't want that for you, Al. I don't want you to feel like you have to be alone with whatever you're feeling. If students are bothering you about your name, about expectations, about who your father is, that's not fair, and it's not your fault. You didn't choose to be born a Potter any more than I chose to survive that night when Voldemort tried to kill me. We don't get to choose our histories, but we do get to choose how we respond to them. You can write to me about anything, any time. I'll always write back. And if you need me to come to Hogwarts, I will. McGonagall won't mind. I know all her passwords anyway. Love, Dad. He sent both letters off with the school owl that night, watching it disappear into the darkness, carrying his inadequate words toward a son who needed more than words could provide. Ginny came to stand beside him at the window, her hand finding his in the dark kitchen. "He'll be all right," she said, as she had said before, would say again. The mantra of parents everywhere who needed to believe their children would survive the world's sharp edges. "I hope so," Harry said. And in the dark, with the owl gone and his letters sent, and nothing to do but wait for a response that might not come, he tried to believe it. The owl arrived 2 days before Christmas break, carrying a response from Albus that Harry had been waiting for with increasing anxiety. He recognized his son's handwriting on the envelope immediately. Precise, careful, the letters formed with the same attention to detail that Albus brought to everything he did. Harry was alone in the kitchen when it arrived, Ginny having taken Lily to Diagon Alley for last-minute Christmas shopping. He opened the letter standing at the counter, his cold tea forgotten beside him. "Dear Dad, I'm sorry James wrote to you. I didn't want him to worry, or you. I'm handling things, mostly. The Slytherin 5th years haven't bothered me again since Professor McGonagall spoke to them. I assume that was you. Thank you, I think, though it was also a bit embarrassing. But that's not really the problem. The problem is that everyone expects me to be like you, or like James, or like some combination of both, and I'm not. I'm just me. and I don't know if that's going to be enough. Marcus, my friend I mentioned, asked me yesterday what it's like being Harry Potter's son. He didn't mean it in a bad way. He was just curious. But I didn't know how to answer. What am I supposed to say? It's fine. It's hard. It's something I think about constantly, but can never quite explain. I know you said I don't have to live up to anyone's expectations. But how do I do that when everyone already has them? When professors expect me to be naturally talented at defense because you were? When students expect me to be brave and confident because you defeated Voldemort? When everyone seems disappointed that I'm just ordinary? I'm not angry at you. I want you to know that. None of this is your fault. You didn't ask to be famous any more than I asked to be your son. But I don't know how to be Albus Potter without disappointing people, and I don't know how to just be Albus without the Potter part defining everything. I'll be home in 2 days. We can talk then, if you want. Or not talk. Maybe not talking would be easier. Love. Al Harry read the letter 3 times, each reading making the tightness in his chest worse. He remembered being 11, being different, feeling the weight of expectations he hadn't earned and couldn't meet. But his experience had been inverted from Albus's. Harry had been famous, without understanding why, celebrated for surviving something he couldn't remember, expected to be special when he'd felt utterly ordinary. Albus knew exactly why he was different, understood the history that shaped people's expectations, and was trying desperately to be ordinary when everyone insisted he should be extraordinary. Harry folded the letter carefully and placed it in his pocket. Then he sat at the kitchen table, pulled out parchment and quill, and began writing a response he knew wouldn't arrive before Albus came home. But he wrote anyway, needing to organize his thoughts, to find the words that might help his son carry a burden Harry understood too well. Dear Al, thank you for being honest with me. That takes courage too, even if it doesn't feel like it. You asked how to be yourself when everyone has expectations. I wish I had a simple answer. The truth is, I'm still figuring that out myself. Even now, 17 years after the war ended, people still expect things from me. They still see the boy who lived before they see Harry. It used to make me angry, then sad, and now mostly just tired. But here's what I've learned. You can't control what other people expect. You can't make them see you clearly when they're looking at your name instead of your face. The only thing you can control is whether you let their expectations define how you see yourself. You're not ordinary, Al, but you're also not extraordinary in the ways people expect. You're extraordinary in your own ways, in your kindness, in your thoughtfulness, in the way you see things clearly and think before you speak. Those aren't dramatic qualities. They won't make exciting stories. But they matter more than most people realize. I'll see you in 2 days. We'll talk if you want to, or sit quietly if you'd prefer. Either way, I'm here. Love, Dad. He didn't send the letter. Instead, he left it on the kitchen table, folded once, waiting for when Albus came home, and they could have the conversation that had been building since platform 9 3/4, since before that, really. Since the day Albus had been born and Harry had looked at his second son and realized he'd given him a name heavy with history, with expectations, with the weight of heroes neither of them had chosen. The Hogwarts Express arrived at King's Cross on a grey December afternoon, the sky low and threatening snow. Harry stood on platform 9 3/4 with Ginny and Lily. watching students pour from the train in a tide of noise and movement and relief at being home for the holidays. James appeared first, predictably, his trunk levitated behind him by a helpful older student, his grin visible from halfway down the platform. He ran to them, actually ran, despite being 11 and theoretically too old for such displays, and hugged Ginny, then Lily, then Harry, talking the entire time about Quidditch and the last-minute prank he and his dormitory mates had pulled, and how much homework they'd been assigned over break. "Where's Al?" Ginny asked, scanning the crowd for their other son. "Still getting his stuff," James said, unconcerned. "He takes forever packing. Rose said she'd help him." They waited, the platform gradually emptying as families reunited and departed, trunks and owls and excitement flowing past them toward the barrier and home. Harry kept his eyes on the train's doors, watching students emerge in ones and twos, searching for Albus's dark hair, his careful movements, his too serious face. Finally, he appeared, smaller than Harry remembered, though it had only been 3 months, with Rose beside him, both of them levitating their trunks with matching concentration. Albus saw his family, and his expression did something complicated. Relief and apprehension, and something else Harry couldn't quite name. "There you are," Ginny said, hugging him. "We were starting to worry." "Sorry," Albus said into her shoulder. "Couldn't find one of my books." Lily demanded her own hug, and Albus complied, then stood awkwardly before Harry, uncertain whether hugging was still allowed or if 3 months apart had made them too formal for such gestures. Harry pulled him into a hug anyway, brief but firm, and felt Albus relax slightly against him before stepping back. "Good term?" Harry asked. "It was fine." The answer came automatically, rehearsed. Then Albus seemed to remember his letter, the honesty he'd committed to parchment, and amended. "It was hard sometimes, but fine overall." They collected the trunks, said goodbye to Ron and Hermione and their children, and made their way through the barrier back into the Muggle world. The walk to the car was filled with James's chatter, Lily's questions, Ginny's gentle direction. Albus walked beside Harry, quiet, occasionally glancing up as though checking whether his father was angry or disappointed or some other emotion he'd been anticipating. Harry wasn't angry. He was worried and sad and wishing desperately that he could fix this, could lift the weight from his son's shoulders with a spell or a conversation, or simply by loving him enough. But love, he'd learned, wasn't always enough. Sometimes people had to work through their burdens themselves, and all you could do was walk beside them while they did. The evening settled around them with comfortable familiarity. James monopolized dinner conversation with stories from Hogwarts, most of them involving near misses with professors or creative interpretations of school rules. Lily listened raptly, asking questions, storing information for her own future use. Ginny prompted for details about classes, about grades, about whether homework was actually being completed. Albus ate quietly, responding when directly addressed, but otherwise letting the conversation flow around him like water around a stone. After dinner, James disappeared to his room to unpack, or, more likely, to leave his trunk unopened and simply extract what he needed over the next 2 weeks, and Lily settled in the sitting room with a book. Ginny gave Harry a meaningful look, nodding toward where Albus had retreated to the kitchen, ostensibly to get water, but really to have a moment alone. Harry found him standing at the sink, staring out the window at the dark garden, a full glass of water in his hand that he wasn't drinking. "Al," Harry said softly. His son didn't turn around. "I know we should talk. We don't have to. Not tonight, if you're not ready." "I don't know if I'll ever be ready." Albus set the glass down with careful precision, still not looking at Harry. "But I suppose that doesn't matter. Some things don't get easier by waiting." Harry moved to stand beside him at the sink, both of them looking out at the garden where nothing was visible except darkness and the reflection of the kitchen light in the glass. Side by side felt easier somehow, less confrontational than face to face. "I got your letter," Harry said. "The one you sent before break." "I know. You wrote back. I found it on the table. But you didn't read it?" "I started to. Then I thought maybe hearing you say it would be better than reading it." Albus glanced up at Harry finally, his green eyes uncertain. "Was I wrong?" "No." Harry took a breath, trying to organize thoughts that felt too large and complicated for words. "You asked in your letter how to be yourself when everyone has expectations. I don't have a good answer for that, Al. I've been dealing with expectations since I was 11, and I still don't handle them well." "But you're Harry Potter. You defeated Voldemort. You're actually special." "I'm lucky," Harry corrected. "Lucky that my mother's love protected me. Lucky that Voldemort chose to use my blood in his resurrection. Lucky that Dumbledore had worked out the wand's allegiance. I'm not special. I just survived." And everyone decided that meant something it doesn't. Albus was quiet for a moment, processing this. "Do you ever wish you weren't famous?" "Every day." The honesty came easily, perhaps more easily than it should have. "I wish I could walk into a shop without people staring. I wish I could send my children to school without them carrying the weight of my history. I wish a lot of things." "Do you wish you hadn't named me after Professor Snape?" The question startled Harry. He'd expected questions about fame, about expectations, about how to navigate being a Potter in a world that remembered too much. But Albus's question cut deeper, to the heart of something Harry hadn't fully examined. "Why do you ask that?" Albus turned to face him properly now, his young face serious and sad in a way that made Harry's chest ache. "Because everyone knows you named me after Professor Snape, and everyone knows he was Slytherin, and everyone knows you said he was the bravest man you ever knew. But then you were relieved when I wasn't sorted into Slytherin, weren't you? Even though you said it didn't matter." Harry opened his mouth to deny it, then stopped. He'd promised himself he would be honest with his children, even when honesty was uncomfortable, even when it revealed his own failings. "Yes," he admitted, "I was relieved, and you're right. That was hypocritical of me. I told you Slytherin would be fine, that I'd be proud of you no matter what, and I meant it. But when the hat said Gryffindor, I felt relief. And I'm sorry for that. Sorry that you saw it, and sorry that you were right to question it." "Why?" Albus asked, not accusatory, just genuinely trying to understand. Why would it matter? Professor Snape was brave, and Slytherin can't be all bad if he came from there. So why? "Because I'm still fighting prejudices I learned when I was your age," Harry interrupted, needing his son to understand this, to see that Harry's failings weren't Albus's burden to carry. "Because Draco Malfoy and his friends made my life miserable, and most of them were Slytherin. Because Voldemort was Slytherin, and so were most of his followers. Because I learned to associate that house with cruelty and ambition without honor. And even though I know better now, even though I understand that was unfair, the instinct still lives in me." He paused, making himself continue. "I named you after Severus Snape because he was brave, because he spent 17 years protecting me, even though he hated my father, because he made choices that cost him everything and never asked for recognition or reward. Those are Slytherin qualities: ambition, cunning, resourcefulness, used in service of something good. I wanted you to know that. I wanted you to carry that legacy. But you didn't want me sorted there?" "No," Harry admitted, "because I'm a hypocrite. Because it's easy to admire qualities in hindsight, but harder to trust them in the present. Because I wanted to protect you from the prejudice I knew you'd face in Slytherin, and I didn't stop to think that maybe protecting you from discomfort wasn't the same as teaching you courage." Albus looked down at his hands, twisting his fingers together in a gesture that reminded Harry painfully of himself at that age. "The hat wanted to put me in Slytherin. It said I had the qualities. But I asked it not to, just like you did. I asked for Gryffindor because I thought that's what you wanted. What everyone wanted." Harry felt something crack open in his chest. Grief, regret, recognition of a cycle he'd unknowingly perpetuated. His son had asked the Sorting Hat to place him somewhere he thought he should be, rather than where he belonged, had chosen based on expectations rather than identity, had learned from Harry's own mistakes and repeated them. "I'm sorry," Harry said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "Al, I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to feel like you had to choose based on what I wanted. I never wanted my issues to become your issues." "But they are," Albus said simply. "Your issues are my issues. Because I'm your son. That's how it works, isn't it? Children inherit their parents' problems along with their names." Harry wanted to deny this, but he couldn't. It was true, painfully true, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. He'd inherited the Dursleys' cruelty, even if only in the ways it had shaped him, made him cautious about taking up space, about believing he deserved love. Albus had inherited Harry's fame, his history, his unresolved prejudices about Slytherin House. "Yes," Harry said finally, "but you don't have to carry them the same way I did. You get to choose how you respond to what you've inherited. That's the difference between being shaped by something and being defined by it." "I don't know how to do that." Albus's voice was small, young, uncertain. "I don't know how to be just Albus when everyone sees Potter first. I don't know how to figure out who I am when everyone already thinks they know." Harry pulled out one of the kitchen chairs and sat down, suddenly tired, the weight of 17 years of fame pressing down on him with renewed force. Albus hesitated, then sat across from him at the table where they'd shared so many meals, where James's letters had been read aloud, and Christmas plans had been made, and ordinary life had unfolded in quiet moments between the chaos. "When I first came to Hogwarts," Harry said slowly, "I was desperate to be special. The Dursleys had spent my whole childhood telling me I was worthless, a burden, a freak. Then suddenly I was famous, and people wanted to meet me, and I thought maybe that meant I mattered. But it didn't take long to realize that people didn't want to know me. They wanted to know the boy who lived. They wanted the story, not the person." He paused, remembering those early days, the excitement that had curdled into isolation, the realization that fame wasn't the same as belonging. It took me years to understand that being special didn't matter. What mattered was having people who saw me clearly. Ron and Hermione and your mum, and later other people who looked past the scar and the story and saw Harry. Just Harry. That's what I want for you, Al. Not for you to live up to expectations or prove you're special. Just for you to find people who see you clearly, and to become someone you're proud of being, regardless of what anyone else thinks. But what if who I am isn't enough? Albus asked, and there was something desperate in his voice, something that had been building for months, maybe years. What if I'm just ordinary and boring and not brave or talented or anything like you or James or... Then you're enough exactly as you are, Harry interrupted firmly. Al, listen to me. I don't need you to be brave. I don't need you to be talented. I don't need you to be anything except kind and honest and yourself. The rest is just noise. Other people's expectations are noise. They don't matter. They feel like they matter. I know. Harry reached across the table, and Albus met him halfway, their hands clasping in the space between them. They feel like they matter because you're 11 and still figuring out who you are, and it's hard to do that when everyone's watching. But I promise you, Al, one day you'll know yourself well enough that other people's opinions won't shake you. One day you'll be comfortable enough in your own skin that fame and expectations will feel less like weight and more like background noise you can ignore. When? Albus asked, and he sounded very young. When does that happen? Harry smiled sadly. I don't know. I'm still waiting for it myself. But it gets easier. I promise it gets easier. They sat together in the quiet kitchen, hands clasped across the table, father and son carrying different versions of the same burden. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, small flakes drifting past the window, soft and silent, covering the garden in a blanket of white that made everything look clean and new and possible. I don't regret your name, Harry said finally. I don't regret naming you after Severus Snape, even though it's complicated, even though people expect things because of it. But I do regret not preparing you better for what that would mean. I regret not teaching you earlier that you get to define what your name means, not the other way around. Albus nodded slowly, not quite convinced, but listening, trying to believe. Can I ask you something? Harry said. Okay. If the Hat had insisted on Slytherin, if it hadn't listened when you asked for Gryffindor, would you have been all right? Albus considered this seriously, his brow furrowing in concentration. I don't know, he admitted finally. Maybe. Or maybe I would have been miserable. I can't know because it didn't happen, but I think part of me wishes it had insisted, so the choice wouldn't have been mine, so I wouldn't have to wonder if I made the right decision. You can't live your life trying to avoid choices, Al. They find you anyway. I know, but it would be easier if someone else made them for me. Harry squeezed his son's hand gently. Easier, yes, but not better. You get to choose who you become, Al. That's a gift, even when it feels like a burden. Don't give that away because it's hard. Albus nodded, and something in his expression shifted. Not resolution exactly, but perhaps acceptance. Understanding that the weight wouldn't disappear, but that he could learn to carry it differently. They sat together a while longer, the kitchen warm and quiet around them, the snow falling steadily outside. Eventually, Ginny appeared in the doorway, Lily trailing behind her, and the moment broke naturally, easily, without awkwardness. "Hot chocolate," Ginny offered, already moving toward the stove. "Yes, please," Albus said, and his voice was lighter than it had been all evening. Harry released his son's hand and watched, as Albus moved to help Ginny with the mugs, as James thundered down the stairs demanding to know if there was hot chocolate, as Lily climbed into her chair and announced she wanted extra marshmallows. The conversation hadn't fixed everything. Albus would still struggle with expectations, would still carry the weight of a name he hadn't chosen, would still face prejudice and assumptions and the burden of being Harry Potter's son. But he wouldn't face it alone. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all Harry could offer: presence, honesty, and the promise that being ordinary was not the same as being insufficient. Outside, the snow continued falling, steady and sure, transforming the familiar garden into something new. The Auror office had sent the summons by interdepartmental memo. The purple paper airplane landing on Harry's breakfast table 3 weeks after the children had returned to Hogwarts. "Routine visit to Hogwarts," it read. "Nothing urgent. Need liaison with McGonagall regarding updated security protocols. Harry Potter requested. Friday afternoon." Harry had folded the memo carefully, tucking it into his pocket while Ginny watched over her morning tea, her expression knowing. "You've been looking for an excuse to visit," she said. "I haven't." "You have. You've been worried about Al since he went back." Harry didn't deny it. The Christmas holiday had helped. That conversation in the kitchen had cleared some air between them, made things feel less fraught. But Albus had still returned to Hogwarts quiet and uncertain, and James's subsequent letters had mentioned that his brother was still being weird and spending too much time alone. So when Friday came, Harry apparated to Hogsmeade with something like relief, the familiar village appearing around him with its crooked buildings and smoking chimneys and the promise of Hogwarts just beyond. The walk up to the castle was cold, late January wind cutting through his cloak, but Harry barely noticed. He'd walked this path so many times, as a student, as a teacher, during his brief tenure in the Auror training program, as a parent on Platform 9 3/4, watching his children board the train that would bring them here. The castle rose before him, ancient and solid, its towers reaching toward grey winter clouds, its windows glowing with warm light. The gates recognized him, swinging open without prompting, and Harry stepped onto the grounds properly, the wards accepting his presence with a gentle pulse of magic that felt almost like welcome. McGonagall met him in the entrance hall, looking exactly as she always had, stern, composed, her robes immaculate, her expression suggesting she'd already anticipated everything he might say and had prepared appropriate responses. "Potter," she said, extending her hand, "good of you to come." "Head mistress." Harry shook her hand, noting the subtle warmth in her grip, the way her stern expression softened fractionally. She'd been his teacher, his head of house, his supporter when he'd needed it most. Now she was responsible for his sons, and Harry was grateful it was her. "The security protocols won't take long," she said, gesturing toward the stairs. "But I suspect you'd like to see your sons while you're here. If that's allowed. It's lunch period. They'll be in the Great Hall." McGonagall's expression shifted into something that might have been amusement. "Though I should warn you, your presence will cause quite a disruption. It always does." Harry grimaced. "I can be subtle." "No, you can't. None of your family can. but she said it with fondness, leading him through corridors that Harry knew by heart, past portraits that called greetings or stared with undisguised curiosity, up staircases that had stopped moving for them automatically. They discussed the security protocols in McGonagall's office, updates to the wards, new procedures for visiting parents, adjustments to the flu network, following a minor incident with a confused first year who tried to call home during restricted hours. The conversation was mundane, professional, and Harry contributed where appropriate, while his mind kept drifting toward the great hall below, toward his sons eating lunch with their classmates, unaware he was here. "Potter," McGonagall said finally, interrupting his distraction, "how is Albus truly doing?" Harry looked up sharply. "You've noticed something?" "I notice everything that happens in my school." She folded her hands on her desk, her expression grave. "Your younger son is struggling, not academically. His marks are satisfactory, if not exceptional. But socially, emotionally, he's isolated himself more than is healthy for a first-year student. James said he spends a lot of time alone. Too much time. He eats quickly and leaves meals early. He goes to the library when he should be socializing. He's polite to his professors, but doesn't seek help when he needs it." McGonagall paused. "He reminds me of you, actually, in 5th year, when you were trying to carry everything alone." Harry felt the comparison like a blow. His 5th year had been a disaster. Umbridge and the DA and Sirius and the Department of Mysteries. He'd pushed everyone away, convinced himself he had to handle everything alone, and it had nearly destroyed him. "I've talked to him," Harry said. "At Christmas. I thought it helped." "I'm sure it did, but one conversation doesn't undo months of accumulated pressure." McGonagall leaned forward slightly. "Your son is carrying a burden he shouldn't have to carry alone. He needs to understand that asking for help isn't weakness, that isolation isn't strength. I don't know how to teach him that when I still struggle with it myself." "Then perhaps that's something you both need to learn." McGonagall stood, signalling the meeting's end. "Go see your sons, Potter. Let them know you're here. Sometimes presence matters more than advice." The Great Hall was exactly as Harry remembered. Soaring ceiling, enchanted to show the grey winter sky. 4 long house tables stretching the length of the room. The subtle roar of hundreds of voices talking and laughing and arguing over lunch. The smells of food. Roast chicken and potatoes and vegetables, fresh bread and pumpkin juice, filled the air with comfortable warmth. Harry entered through the main doors, and conversation faltered like a stone dropped in water, the silence spreading outward in waves as students noticed his presence. Heads turned, whispers started, younger students pointing while older ones tried to look casual while staring. He scanned the Gryffindor table, finding James first, easy to spot with his animated conversation and broad gestures, sitting with a group of first years who seemed to find him endlessly entertaining. Further down the table, Rose sat with a book propped against her pumpkin juice, reading while she ate. And there, at the very end of the table, almost isolated from the others, sat Albus. His son was, eating mechanically, not looking at anyone, his shoulders slightly hunched, as though trying to make himself smaller. A few seats away sat other first years, including a dark-haired boy Harry assumed was Marcos, the friend Albus had mentioned in his letters. But there was a clear space between them, as though Albus had deliberately positioned himself just far enough away to discourage conversation. Harry's chest tightened. He'd seen that posture before, in mirrors, in old photographs, in his own memories of trying to be invisible, while simultaneously desperate to belong. James spotted him first, his eyes going wide. "Dad?" He said it loud enough that the remaining conversations in the hall died completely, every eye turning toward where Harry stood near the entrance. Harry raised his hand in a small wave, trying to appear casual, despite the hundreds of students now staring at him with varying expressions of shock, excitement, curiosity, or, in the case of a few Slytherin students, skeptical interest. He walked toward the Gryffindor table, aware of every eye tracking his movement, of whispers starting up again behind him. James jumped up, grinning widely, clearly delighted by this unexpected appearance. Rose looked up from her book, surprised, but pleased. And Albus? Albus went very still, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth, his expression caught between pleasure at seeing his father and mortification at being singled out. "Hey," Harry said when he reached them, keeping his voice casual. "Mind if I join you?" "You're here," James said unnecessarily, sliding over to make room. "Are you staying? Are you teaching a class? Did something happen?" "Just visiting. Had some business with Professor McGonagall." Harry sat down between his sons, very aware of the attention still focused on them, of students at other tables craning their necks to watch. "Thought I'd stop by and see how you're both doing." "We're brilliant," James said immediately. "I scored 3 goals in practice yesterday, and Professor Flitwick said my levitation charm was remarkably controlled, which I think was a compliment, even though he sounded surprised." Harry smiled. "That's great, James." He turned to Albus, who had set his fork down and was staring at his plate as though it might provide escape. "How about you, Al? How are things going?" "Fine," Albus said quietly, not meeting Harry's eyes. "Just fine?" "Yeah, fine." An awkward silence settled over their section of the table, made more awkward by the fact that everyone was listening. A second-year girl 2 seats away wasn't even pretending not to stare, her mouth slightly open, as though Harry Potter eating lunch at Hogwarts was the most fascinating thing she'd ever witnessed. "Dad," James said, oblivious to the tension, "can you tell everyone about the time you fought the basilisk? Some of the second years don't believe it was actually 60 feet long." "It was definitely 60 feet, Rose confirmed, looking up from her book. "Possibly longer. The accounts vary, but all sources agree it was enormous." "I don't think now is the time," Harry started, but James was already launching into his own version of the story, embellishing freely, gesturing with both hands, while other students leaned closer to listen. Harry glanced at Albus, who had picked up his fork again and was pushing food around his plate in patterns that might have been letters or might have been nothing at all. His son's face was carefully blank, the same expression he'd worn in Diagon Alley, the mask he put on when he wanted to disappear but couldn't. "Al," Harry said quietly, under cover of James's storytelling, "can we talk? Just for a minute?" Albus's eyes flickered toward him briefly. "Here?" "No, somewhere quieter." For a moment Harry thought Albus might refuse, might insist everything was fine and go back to his isolated lunch. But then his son nodded slightly and stood, picking up his plate to return it to the house elves, the gesture giving him an excuse to leave. Harry stood as well, touching James's shoulder briefly. "I'll be back in a bit." "Where are you?" "Oh." James's face showed understanding. "Okay, tell Al I saved him some treacle tart." They left the great hall together, father and son, walking side by side through corridors that echoed with distant sounds of student life. Harry let Albus lead, following as his son took them through passages Harry recognized, past the charms classroom, up a staircase that shifted obligingly beneath their feet, through a portrait hole that opened onto a corridor Harry had used as a shortcut countless times during his own school years. They ended up in a small alcove near a window overlooking the grounds, the kind of forgotten space that Hogwarts had in abundance, where students went to be alone, or couples went to kiss, or people went when they needed to not be found for a while. Albus stood at the window, looking out at the frozen lake, the distant mountains, the bare trees of the forbidden forest. Snow covered everything, pristine and cold and beautiful in the weak afternoon light. "You didn't have to come check on me," Albus said finally. "I'm fine. McGonagall says you're spending too much time alone." "McGonagall talks too much." Harry almost smiled at the note of rebellion in his son's voice, so unlike Albus's usual careful politeness. "She's worried about you. So am I. Everyone's always worried about me." Albus turned from the window, and his face was no longer carefully blank. It was frustrated, tired, older than 11 should look. "James is never worried about. Rose is never worried about. Just me, because I'm struggling, or isolated, or whatever other words adults use when they think someone isn't fitting in properly." "That's not." "It is," Albus interrupted, and there was heat in his voice now, anger that had apparently been building for weeks. "You're worried because I'm not like James, laughing and making friends and loving every second of being here. McGonagall's worried because I eat lunch alone sometimes. My professors are probably worried because I'm not naturally brilliant at everything like you were." "I wasn't naturally brilliant at anything," Harry said. "We've talked about this." "But you were brave. Everyone says so. You were brave, and you had friends, and you saved the world, and I'm just—" Albus gestured helplessly. "I'm just me, ordinary and quiet and not particularly good at anything, and everyone keeps acting like that's something to be concerned about instead of just how I am." Harry looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw not the child who'd left on the Hogwarts Express, but someone older, harder, worn down by months of trying to be something he wasn't, of carrying expectations he'd never agreed to carry. "You're right," Harry said. Albus blinked, clearly not expecting agreement. "What?" "You're right. Everyone is worried about you, and maybe that's not fair. Maybe you don't need to be fixed or helped or worried about. Maybe you're just figuring things out in your own way, and everyone else needs to give you space to do that." "Oh." Albus seemed momentarily at a loss. Yeah, that's what I meant." Harry moved to stand beside his son at the window, both of them looking out at the grounds rather than at each other. "But I'm still going to worry, not because you're doing anything wrong, but because I'm your father, and worrying comes with the job. You can tell me to stop, and I won't stop, but I'll try to worry quieter." Despite himself, Albus's mouth twitched toward a smile. "Worry quieter. Less obviously, more internally. I'll perfect my worried face so you can't tell the difference from my normal face. Your normal face already looks worried most of the time. Then I'm already good at it." They stood together in the quiet alcove, and Harry could feel some of the tension leaving Albus's shoulders, the anger draining. Away now that it had been acknowledged, validated, given space to exist. "I do have friends," Albus said after a while. "Marcus and I study together, and there's a girl in Ravenclaw, Sophia, who sits with us sometimes in the library. They're quiet, too. We don't do loud friendship the way James does, but it's still friendship. I believe you. And I like eating lunch at the end of the table. It's less overwhelming there. James and Rose and everyone else are great, but they're also exhausting, and sometimes I just need quiet." "That makes sense." Albus glanced up at him, suspicious. "You're agreeing with everything I say because you're making good points, or because you think if you agree with me, I'll stop being upset. Can't it be both?" Harry smiled slightly. "Al, I'm not here to tell you how to be at Hogwarts. I'm not here to fix you, or change you, or convince you to be more like James. I'm here because I was in the castle anyway, and I wanted to see you. And I thought maybe we could have lunch together. That's all. But you did check with McGonagall about me." "I did," Harry admitted, "because I worry. But that doesn't mean I think you're doing anything wrong. You can be fine, and I can still worry. Parents are good at holding contradictory feelings simultaneously." Albus considered this, his expression thoughtful. "Do you worry about James?" "Of course. He seems like he's doing great, though. Everyone loves him." "Everyone loving you doesn't mean life is easy," Harry said carefully. "James has his own struggles. They're different from yours, but they're real. And yes, I worry about him too. Different worries, but still worries." "What do you worry about with James?" Harry hesitated, not sure how honest to be, then decided Albus deserved honesty. "I worry that he's so comfortable with attention that he doesn't know how to be alone with himself. I worry that he uses humor and charm to avoid dealing with difficult feelings. I worry that he's learning to perform confidence instead of actually building it." Albus processed this. "I never thought about it like that. We all have our things to work through, Al. James's just look different from yours because they're louder, more visible. But that doesn't make them easier." They lapsed into comfortable silence, watching as a group of students emerged onto the grounds below, bundled in cloaks and scarves, heading toward Hagrid's hut for what was probably a Care of Magical Creatures lesson. Their laughter drifted up faintly, carried on the cold wind. "I'm not unhappy here," Albus said suddenly. "I know everyone thinks I am, but I'm not. It's hard sometimes, and people expect things I can't give them, and I get tired of being stared at. But I also like learning magic, and I like my classes, and I like having friends who don't expect me to be exciting or brave or special. So I'm not unhappy. I'm just adjusting." "That's fair," Harry said. "And for what it's worth, adjusting is hard. It took me years to feel comfortable at Hogwarts, and even then there were days I wanted to hide in my dormitory and not talk to anyone." "Really?" "Really. 5th year especially. I was so angry at everything, so convinced I had to handle everything alone, that I pushed away the people who cared about me, made everything harder than it needed to be." Harry paused. "I don't want that for you, Al. I don't want you to think asking for help or admitting you're struggling means you've failed. But I also don't want to pressure you into being someone you're not, just because it would make me worry less." Albus looked up at him, his green eyes, Ginny's eyes, searching Harry's face for something. "What do you want then?" Harry thought about this carefully. What did he want for his son? not fame or heroism or greatness, not even happiness, necessarily, though he hoped for that too. He wanted. "I want you to become someone you're proud of being," Harry said finally. "I want you to figure out who you are without letting other people's expectations define you. I want you to be kind and honest and brave in the ways that matter to you, not the ways other people think bravery should look. And I want you to know that whatever you become, however you choose to live your life, I'll be proud of you. Even if I'm ordinary? Especially if you're ordinary." Harry put his hand on Albus's shoulder, a light touch that his son didn't pull away from. "The world needs ordinary people, Al. Good people living quiet lives, being kind to others, finding meaning in small moments. That's not less valuable than defeating dark wizards, or playing Quidditch, or being famous. It's just different. And if that's who you are, if you're someone who prefers quiet lunches and library study sessions and a few close friends instead of a crowd, then that's exactly who you should be." Albus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thick. "I thought you'd be disappointed." "Never," Harry said firmly. "Not ever, Al. Not for any reason." His son leaned into him slightly, and Harry pulled him into a proper hug, feeling Albus cling to him the way he had at King's Cross, the way he had at Christmas, small and solid and brave, in ways that had nothing to do with fighting dark wizards or playing Quidditch or being extraordinary. When they separated, Albus's eyes were bright, but he was smiling. A real smile, not the careful, polite expression he wore like armor. "We should go back," Albus said. "Before James eats all the treacle tart, he said he was saving me." He probably already has. Definitely already has. They walked back through the corridors together, and Harry felt lighter than he had in months. The conversation hadn't fixed everything. Albus would still struggle with expectations, would still face difficulties being Harry Potter's son, but something had shifted. Some understanding had been reached, some permission given for Albus to be himself without apology. When they entered the Great Hall, lunch was ending, students beginning to disperse toward afternoon classes. James saw them and waved, pointing at a plate with exactly one piece of treacle tart remaining, looking enormously pleased with himself for his restraint. Albus went to claim his dessert, and Harry watched as Marcus called a greeting, as Sophia from Ravenclaw stopped by the Gryffindor table to say something that made Albus laugh, as Rose showed him something in her book that required both of them to lean close and debate quietly. His son had friends, had a life here, was figuring things out in his own way, at his own pace, becoming his own person despite the weight of the name he carried. And maybe that was enough. Maybe Harry's job wasn't to clear the path ahead, or carry Albus's burdens, or make everything easy. Maybe his job was simply to remind his son that being ordinary was not the same as being insufficient, that quiet courage mattered just as much as the loud kind, that being loved didn't depend on being extraordinary. McGonagall appeared at his elbow, having entered the hall so quietly he hadn't noticed. Satisfied Potter. Harry watched Albus laugh at something James said, watched him steal a bite of his brother's dessert when James wasn't looking, watched him be 11 and ordinary and exactly himself. "Yes," Harry said, "I think I am." "Good. Now leave before you disrupt my entire afternoon schedule. The students will be talking about this for weeks." Harry smiled. said goodbye to his sons, and left Hogwarts the way he'd come, through corridors he knew by heart, past portraits that called farewells, out into the cold January afternoon. The walk back to Hogsmeade felt shorter somehow, lighter. Behind him, Hogwarts stood ancient and solid against the grey sky, holding his sons safely within its walls, teaching them magic and friendship and how to become themselves. It was enough. It had to be enough. And perhaps, Harry thought as he apparated home, it actually was. The garden was quiet in the way only summer evenings could be, warmth lingering in the air even as the sun dropped toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. Harry sat on the back steps of their house, a mug of tea cooling in his hands, watching fireflies begin their slow dance above the overgrown grass that Ginny kept threatening to trim but never quite got around to. The war had been over for 17 years. 17 years of peace, of rebuilding, of learning to live in a world where dark wizards stayed defeated and prophecies stayed fulfilled, and children grew up without waiting for the sky to fall. And yet, Harry still sat facing the garden gate, still positioned himself so he could see both the house entrance and the back fence, still ran through escape routes in his head. Apparate from here, shield charm there, get the children out through the kitchen window if necessary. The habits persisted. The vigilance remained. Some things, it seemed, war taught too well to ever fully unlearn. The back door opened behind him, and Harry didn't turn. He'd heard Ginny's footsteps, light and familiar, knew her movements the way he knew his own heartbeat. She sat beside him on the step, her shoulder warm against his, her own mug of tea steaming gently in the cooling air. "Kids are inside," she said. "James is showing Lily some ridiculous card trick he learned from George. Al's reading." "Of course he is." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fireflies multiply as darkness crept across the garden. The summer holiday was halfway through, both boys home from Hogwarts, the house full again with their presents, James's laughter, Albus's quiet observations, Lily's constant questions about when she'd finally get to go to school herself. It had been a good year, Harry thought. Not easy, necessarily, but good. James had continued thriving, made the house Quidditch team officially, earned solid marks in most subjects, collected friends the way some people collected chocolate frog cards. Albus had found his footing more slowly, but he'd found it. His letters had grown longer, less guarded, filled with details about library study sessions and conversations with Marcus and Sophia, about classes he was enjoying, and professors who were patient with his careful, methodical approach to learning. Different children, different paths, both of them figuring out how to be themselves in a world that expected them to be echoes of their father. "You're thinking too loud," Ginny said, not looking at him. "I can hear it from here." "Sorry. What are you thinking about?" Harry considered the question, trying to sort through the tangle of thoughts that had been occupying him lately. "About how I'm still not very good at this. At peace, I mean. At living in a world where nothing terrible is about to happen." Ginny was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know you don't have to apologize for that, right? For being shaped by what you survived." "I know, but I don't want the kids to learn it from me. I don't want them growing up thinking the world is dangerous just because I can't stop treating it like it is." "They're not learning fear from you, Harry. They're learning caution. There's a difference." "Is there?" Harry set his mug down on the step beside him, freeing his hands to gesture slightly. I sit with my back to walls. I check rooms twice. I plan escape routes everywhere we go. That's not caution. That's survival instinct, Ginny interrupted firmly. That's what people who've been through war carry with them. It's not wrong. It's not something you need to fix or hide or apologize for. The back door opened again before Harry could respond, and Lily appeared, her presence announced by the sound of her bare feet on the wooden steps. She squeezed between her parents, settling herself on Harry's lap with the casual confidence of a 7-year-old who knew she was welcome. "Why are you both sitting out here?" she asked. "It's more interesting inside." "Just enjoying the quiet," Harry said, adjusting so Lily was comfortable. "It's not quiet. The fireflies are loud." "Fireflies don't make noise, love." "They do if you listen properly." Lily pointed at one drifting past, its light pulsing gently. "See? That one is humming." Ginny smiled. "What's it humming?" "A song about summer, and grass, and being small and glowy." They watched the fireflies together, Lily narrating their imagined songs, and Harry felt something in his chest loosen slightly. This was what peace looked like, he supposed. Not the absence of vigilance or worry, but moments like this. His youngest daughter in his lap, his wife beside him, the evening warm and gentle around them. The door opened once more, and this time both boys emerged. James immediately sprawled on the grass, careless and comfortable, while Albus sat more carefully on the step above Harry and Ginny, his book still in his hands, finger marking his place. "Lily, you were supposed to watch my card trick," James said, sounding injured. "I watched 3 times. That was enough. But I learned a new ending. Show me tomorrow." Lily settled more firmly against Harry, clearly having no intention of moving. Albus glanced down at his book, then up at the darkening sky, and Harry watched his middle son make the small decision to close the book, to set it aside, to be present in this moment, rather than lost in whatever story he'd been reading. "Dad?" Lily said suddenly, her voice cutting through the comfortable quiet. "Why do you always sit facing the door?" The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through the moment. Harry felt Ginny's attention sharpen, felt both boys go still, waiting to hear how he'd answer. He could deflect, could make a joke, change the subject, pretend he didn't know what she meant. He'd gotten good at deflection over the years, at avoiding conversations that required vulnerability, at keeping his children safe from the darker parts of his history. But Lily was 7, would be 8 soon, old enough to notice patterns, to ask questions, to deserve honest answers. And James and Albus were listening too, both of them silent in a way that suggested they'd wondered the same thing, but never quite asked. "Because I'm learning to live in a world where the sky won't fall," Harry said finally, the words coming out slower than he'd intended. "And it's harder than I expected." Lily twisted in his lap to look up at him, her expression serious. "Why would the sky fall?" "It won't. That's the point." Harry took a breath, trying to find words that would make sense to a 7-year-old, that wouldn't frighten her, but also wouldn't lie. "When I was younger, before you were born, bad things happened sometimes, dangerous things, and I had to learn how to watch for danger, how to be ready all the time, how to keep people safe." "In the war?" James said. Not a question. "Yes, in the war, and before that, at Hogwarts, and even before that." Harry glanced at Ginny, who nodded slightly, encouraging him to continue. "I learned to always know where the exits were, to watch for threats, to plan what I'd do if something went wrong. And those were good skills to have then, when danger was real and constant. But now there's no danger," Lily finished. "But you still watch." "Yes. Why?" How to explain this to a child? How to make her understand that trauma lived in the body, in habits and reflexes and instincts that persisted long after the threat had passed? That knowing intellectually you were safe was different from feeling safe, from believing it, in the part of yourself that made decisions about where to sit and how to position yourself and whether to relax or stay vigilant. "Because habits are hard to change," Harry said finally. "Because my brain learned to watch for danger when I was young. And even though the danger is gone, my brain still thinks it needs to keep watching. It's trying to keep me safe, but it's working too hard, looking for problems that aren't there anymore." Albus leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful. "Is that why you check my room twice at night sometimes, when you think I'm asleep?" Harry's breath caught. He'd thought he'd been subtle about that, about easing Albus's door open after saying goodnight, making sure his son was safely in bed, that the windows were secure, that nothing threatened. "You notice that?" "I notice a lot of things." Albus's voice was gentle, without accusation. "It's okay. I just wondered why." "Because checking makes me feel better," Harry admitted. "Even though I know you're fine, even though nothing is going to hurt you, checking helps my brain believe it. It's not rational, but it's real." James sat up in the grass, his expression unusually serious. "Mum does it too. Checks the wards before bed. I hear her walking the house. Sometimes," Ginny sighed. "So much for being stealthy." "You're terrible at being stealthy, Mum. You always hit that one creaky floorboard." Despite the heaviness of the conversation, Harry felt his mouth twitch toward a smile. Their children saw them so clearly, saw the habits and patterns they thought they'd hidden, and somehow that felt less shameful than he'd expected. Less like failure, and more like reality. The reality of two parents doing their best to raise children in peace while still carrying war in their bones. "Do you think it gets easier?" Albus asked, and the question was directed at Harry, but seemed to encompass something larger than just vigilance. "Learning to live without waiting for something bad to happen?" Harry looked at his middle son, saw the real question beneath the spoken one. Albus was asking if expectations got easier to carry, if the weight of being Harry Potter's son would ever feel lighter, if peace, internal peace, the kind that let you relax fully, was something you could learn, or if some people were just shaped wrong for it. "I don't know yet," Harry said honestly. "Some days are easier than others. Some days I can sit in a restaurant without needing to face the door, or go to sleep without checking every lock twice, or trust that good things can last without something coming to ruin them. Other days I can't, but the easy days are getting more frequent, slowly, very slowly. But they're getting there. How do you make them happen, the easy days?" Harry thought about this, about what had helped and what hadn't, about the small shifts that had accumulated over years into something that might, eventually, resemble peace. "I let people help me. Your mum, Ron, Hermione. I talk about the hard things instead of pretending they don't exist. I remind myself that being vigilant doesn't mean I'm still at war. It just means I survived one. And I try. I really try to be present for the good moments, instead of always waiting for them to end. Like now? Lily asked. This is a good moment? This is a very good moment, Harry confirmed, pulling her closer. 5 of us in the garden, fireflies everywhere, nothing terrible happening. This is exactly the kind of moment I used to dream about during the war. We were boring dreams, James said, but he was smiling. The best dreams are boring. Boring means safe. Boring means normal. Boring means I get to watch my children grow up in a world where the biggest problem is whether there's treacle tart left after dinner. They sat together as darkness settled fully, the fireflies thick now, their lights pulsing in patterns that might have been random, or might have been the songs Lily insisted they were singing. Harry's vigilance didn't disappear. He was still aware of the gate, the windows, the routes they could take if something went wrong. But it felt different somehow. Less consuming, more like background noise he could acknowledge without letting it dominate everything else. I'm not sorry that I check doors, Harry said after a while, or that I sit facing exits, or that I plan for problems that probably won't happen. Those things kept me alive when I needed them, and they're part of who I am now. But I am sorry if they've made you feel like the world isn't safe, because it is safe, safer than it's ever been, and you get to grow up knowing that. We know, Albus said quietly. We've always known we're safe, even when you check doors twice. Maybe especially then, James added, because we know you're watching, that you'd keep us safe if something did happen. Harry felt Ginny's hand find his, their fingers interlacing in the space between them. She squeezed gently, a silent acknowledgement of something neither of them needed to speak aloud. My job isn't to prepare you for another war, Harry said, the words feeling important, like something he needed to say clearly, needed his children to hear and remember. My job is to teach you how to live in peace, how to be kind and honest and brave in the small ways that matter every day, how to build good lives in a world that gives you the space to do that. And to buy us ice cream, Lily added, that's also your job. Yes, ice cream is definitely part of it. They stayed in the garden as the stars emerged, faint against the light pollution, but visible if you knew where to look. James eventually sprawled back in the grass, pointing out constellations he half remembered from astronomy class. Albus retreated into comfortable quiet, present, but not needing to fill the silence. Lily fell asleep against Harry's chest, her breathing soft and steady, trusting in the way only children who'd never known real fear could trust. And Harry sat with his family around him, with fireflies dancing and stars emerging and the warm summer air settling like a blanket over everything, and tried to believe what he'd told his children, that peace was possible, that good moments could last, that the sky would not fall just because he'd stopped watching it quite so vigilantly. It was hard. Some days it would be harder than others, but his children were learning different lessons than he'd learned, growing up with different expectations, building different relationships with safety and danger and what it meant to be brave. They wouldn't have to carry war in their bones. They'd carry other things, the weight of their names, perhaps, the burden of expectations, the ordinary difficulties of growing up. But not war. Not the constant vigilance, the inability to relax, the certainty that happiness was temporary and danger was permanent. That was his gift to them. Not fame or heroism or greatness, but the freedom to be ordinary, to live quiet lives, to find meaning in small moments of peace that didn't require defense or vigilance or sacrifice. Ginny leaned her head against his shoulder, and Harry breathed in the summer evening, grass and fireflies and the particular sweetness of his daughter's hair, and let himself believe, just for this moment, that everything would be all right. Not perfect, not without difficulty or worry or the occasional hard day when old instincts flared too bright and peace felt impossibly far away. But all right. Safe. Good enough. His children would grow up knowing that love didn't depend on being extraordinary. That courage came in many forms. That being yourself was enough, even when the world expected legends. And maybe, Harry thought, as Lily's breathing deepened and the stars grew brighter, and his family sat together in the quiet garden, maybe that was all anyone could ask for. Peace. Presence, the chance to choose how you lived instead of having it chosen for you. The fireflies continued their slow dance, indifferent and beautiful, lighting up the darkness in small, persistent pulses. And the sky stayed where it belonged, distant and vast and uninterested in falling.